I am Steelfur of Steelfur Speaks, once again back in Ireland, recording this episode of the podcast. I really wanted to show you guys before we kind of dive in, like a bit of a life update in terms of like, I haven't run off to a deserted island, but this is where I spent my previous weekend, yet again stopping me from recording the Steelfur and Saturday segments, which is becoming a meme at this point, but I am determined that at some point this year we will return to Steelfur on Sunday regular showcasing. But I spent a weekend in one of these cottages on what is essentially a deserted island, though I mean in the summer it's not deserted because you usually have about 5 or 6 tents, about 10, 15 campers, and these cottages all sleep about 5 or 6 as well. So, there's about 30 people on the island during the summer, and then in the winter it is deserted. And we went out there for the night. It's near where my family are from. I'll show you where it is on a map in a second. And generally, it was fantastic. If you go to your big map of Ireland and you go to, where I currently am in Dublin, and you go all the way down south to Dingle in the southwest, you will find your way to the Blasket Islands, Inishabro, Inishvickelain, Inishtuskert, Tiracht is out there, and then the Grace Blasket Islands on Blasket Moor, and Beginish is the small island, basically, young island, and there's a few others. So the Blasket Islands is interesting, and we will get to Fab, but it is interesting. It was, until sort of the late 50s, the westernly most inhabited part of Europe. If you go to that map and you kind of zoom out and you think about where this line is, if you don't count Iceland as part of Europe, which is questionable, then this is like the westernmost part of Europe, right? And it was abandoned just because it became too hard to maintain the community there. The community was all emigrating due to poverty, and there were only 50 people left on the island. They couldn't afford to have a doctor, and then some people got sick. And during the winter, when they couldn't really get off the island, because although these two places are quite close, the weather is quite aggressive. Even now, there are days when you just can't sail between the two just because of how choppy and dangerous the ocean is. You can imagine doing it in canvas hulled boat, which they had back then. Can I show you what that looked like? Let me bring that up. This is the traditional Irish boat, the currach, made by stretching canvas over a bar frame. This is one with an engine, but normally they're flat oars. And they could be quite big, and they could have sails as well. They were at one point this shape, depending on how farther they need to go, or whether they were seafaring or river based. But then they evolved into kind of this shape, and they were usually big enough to fit a rowing crew of 5 aside. And there's even speculation that Saint Brendan actually made it to America in one with sails, right? And that journey has been recreated. You can look it up. Anyway, so that's where I was for the weekend. This is Bran. He's a very good boy that belongs to my brother. This is just the views. Bit of fire as the evening went down, and there's no electricity. There is running water from a well, but there's no electricity. There's no shops. You bring all the food that you want, and there is phone signal, but only from the mainland and not everywhere. And you kind of just have a really good evening. And you know what? It's the sort of place where I think if you were ever to host a Fab tournament, it would be incredibly impractical, because you'd have to get all of the people out there on these ferries, and weather might leave you stuck there, but you really would play games in person. By candlelight, maybe, but you would play games in person. That's where I've been, and it was a really great reset from digital life, because even though I had phone signal, it was very much like I was swimming. There's a whole pod of seals on this beach. I don't have a photo of them here, but you can't really see it. And just a chance to relax and enjoy life. Anyway, back to Flesh and Blood. We have had a really big sort of news cycle since I last sat down and spoke. you know, we've had Dash Living Legend, we've had Azalea Living Legend, we've had the Skirmish Season 12 announcement, we've had a SuperSlam announcement. I'm just going to go out and say it. It really feels like Master Set Guardian is going to be a bit of a blanket. Going to be a bit of a miss. Now, why do I think that? Right. We haven't seen a lot of the cards from the set, right? We really haven't seen a lot of the cards from the set. Now, what that tells me is that maybe a lot of the cards from the set aren't yet exciting. And previews are starting next week, right? 2 weeks' time. So, you know, I think on the 25th, the previews are starting, which means that between 25th and the launch date, we've got 2 weeks where they're going to show off tons of cards from this latest set. And they've already kind of started spoiling the set after that. And I'm just like, why? Like, Mastery Set Guardian isn't really being given its breathing room. Okay, no, there's two possibilities. Let's be completely fair to LSS. One of two things. Either the cards in Mastery Set Guardian lean into the two Guardian heroes that are coming up in this next set, and that's why they need to make sure that people see these heroes before before Mastery Set Guardian comes out, or they're just trying to be like, look, buy into the set with Mastery Set Guardian, you will then get two Guardians to play with straight away. You know, there is a synergy there, but part of me is just thinking that Mastery Set Guardian might not land for a lot of people. And I feel like they're kind of already laying the groundwork for that by talking about the next set, by laying out that. And I will say, so one of my metrics for these new side event sets that come out is how well is that format adopted or embraced by the community. And if we go to the very, very handy Skirmish calendar made by Baz the Bard, you will see that not that many skirmishes have chosen to go with Crack Shuffle play. Right now, not to say that none of them have, and I will say some quite large stores like Living Realms, Bellbound Games, Thistle Tavern, all quite large, prominent stores on the scene, have chosen to go with Crack Shuffle play. Few stores have chosen to go with Living Legend, and I think whether you choose to go with Living Legend really depends on what your player base looks like. You really need to look around your player base and say, hey, wait a second, do my players have Living Legend cards or do they have Blitz cards? And if you think they have Living Legend cards and they really want to play Living Legend, then that makes sense. But if you're looking around more of a new community who have Blitz cards, then choosing to play Living Legend is quite a brave choice, right? You kind of have to say who here owns Starvo, who here owns Chain, who has access to those cards to make this deck good. And if they don't, then could be in for a world of pain. So, but this is interesting. So there are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Living Legend. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I miscounted how many. That's 4, that's 8, 9, 10. There's one more Crack Shuffle play than Living Legend, but I again imagine a lot of these stores don't have heavy bases of people with Living Legend decks, right? So they're choosing to play Blitz. But, that's not a resounding endorsement of the new format, right? The people are choosing to play Blitz, a format which gets quite, negative press for the skirmish season instead of playing the new format that's just come out. So, I think the reception is a bit lukewarm. And I think LSS is already starting to market the next set. So I'm a bit worried that maybe it's not going to be the best thing that we've ever seen. Maybe there'll be a lot of cards. The thing is, all of these sets that we've had that are dedicated to a new game format haven't really worked, right? Round the Table kind of played it once before the novelty wore off, maybe twice. Bright Lights didn't really work in the way they wanted it to. I don't think I ever played Crack Shuffle play of Bright Lights. So I'm overly cautious, and I have a feeling that a lot of the power that people were kind of hoping would come into the Guardian class with Valda and things like that. And Guardian is good, like Victor is good, but people do feel like Guardian is missing a way to deal with certain heroes where the matchups are just too heavily skewed against them, like Gravy and board control heroes. And I know that, like, it's okay to have really negative matchups, and it's okay for, you know, Guardians to lose heavily to board heavy control decks and beat Syndra's and things like that. But a lot of people are looking to Mastery Set Guardian to kind of spice up the class a bit. And I do wonder if it's going to succeed in that, or if it is too heavily leaning into crack shuffle play. And that's something to think about. I'm really keen to see what happens. Obviously, as always, if I am wrong, or if my impressions are wrong, the set is an absolute hit, I will be the first person out here saying I'm, wrong. Right? Get on with that. That's fine. The Living Legend was interesting. I don't think there's anything really to talk about. I thought both of these were actually quite good Living Legend journeys. Azalea went from being a hero I personally have called like the worst mechanically designed hero in Flesh and Blood. And what I meant by that, and I kind of extended that to all rangers, because I find the arrow mechanic is just extra steps for worse damage, right? With the exception of like Marlin, who brings in a lot of control effects that make it worth loading arrows. And also, the main thing was that you could load arrows with your weapon every time. That's what made it feel like extra steps. Whereas with Marilyn, you actually have to work to load an arrow, and in return, you get a lot of power, which makes arrows feel like special and like a different class of attacks. Whereas with other rangers, arrows have just felt like attacks with extra steps, which was just use your weapon, right? That's just adding an extra step in between attacking, which didn't really feel like it was worth it. Marilyn feels a bit different. Azalea just felt poorly designed. She felt like she was either, she was loading 1 arrow a turn, she would brick hands where she would draw 3 of the kinds, and then not draw an arrow. She would just have below rate attacks that also required being loaded into the arsenal. And then she would have this whole mechanic of trying to figure out what was on the top card of your deck and putting it in your arsenal so that you could potentially get a bonus. But, other heroes were already getting, their own bonuses that kind of were powerful as well, and you just weren't really keeping up. Then Outsiders came, and she got a whole, buff suite, and she got a whole, poison suite, which really buffed her power, and of course Codex of Frailty as well, really buffed her power, and really made her an interesting deck to compete with. She could still brick, and she'd gone from being massive underdog to overwhelming, powerhouse. And then really from that point, it was just her road to Living Legend was when she was going to get the points. And I really do just like the fact that she went from the bottom tier of heroes to a solid choice to a great deck to, okay, now we're getting some points. Now let's go away. I think she was just a really great Living Legend journey. Dash, a little bit worse, right? Because she has been, I would say, below rate for quite a long time compared to the newer mechanologists that have come out. And it really did feel like she was kind of just lingering around, for a long time. So whereas Azalea's journey was underdog to great to, winning, and then stepped back a bit and then came in and won again. Dash felt like she was kind of like, oh, all right, get a few points here, get a few points there. Really good in one specific meta, and then all right, like just all right. Dash kind of felt like this gradual clawing of points up, whereas Azalea kind of felt like, no one likes me. Okay, now I'm the star. Okay, I'm on the back burner a bit, but I'm always lurking, waiting for my opportunity. Now I'm going to go over. Like, the two did feel different, and I feel like Azalea's probably, I've said it before about people having a really good Living Legend journey. I think Azalea is potentially one of the better Living Legend journeys we've seen. For me, it's the equivalent, and other people will laugh because you played post Outsiders, but to me, like, seeing Azalea Living Legend is the equivalent of seeing Olympia living legend, right? We have a hero who I think is just jank. I just think badly designed, too complicated, not really delivering on anything. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, he starts to win. He gets some big buffs in a set with new warrior cards. He picks up 200 points, 300 points, 400 points. And then he gets up to like 600, 700, and he's just sitting there waiting for his moment to cross over. And then the decks come out, and there's 1 or 2 tournaments where he's good, and he just goes off in a blaze of glory. Right? That's kind of like what Azalea feels like going to me. And I know Azalea players are going to be like, how the hell did you just compare my hero to Olympia? Well, I did, and that's all right. But any of these heroes that I feel like are just designed below rate, like Olympia, Betsy, Ratney Huntsman isn't even that bad. Not good, My point is, I think that is a really good journey, and I think some other heroes like Levia, kind of on a similar journey. They're not great, and if they get a significant buff and they start to build momentum, and they don't just race across the finish line. I think one of the hallmarks, in my mind, of a good living legend journey is one where they don't just get buffed and then race across the finish line. It's one where they build momentum, and then they turn that momentum into success, but then maybe something shifts against them and the meta pushes them back a bit, and people realize, okay, this deck isn't going to win all the time. And then they're close to going, but they're not going to go. And then there's just a moment when it's the right weekend or the right season at ProQuest where just the right card comes out, where people are like, oh, I can play that hero again. Those cards I've had on the back burner, I can bring those back in. And that really good feeling of discovering that old favorite who hasn't retired yet, but is close, is relevant again. And another important component, I think, of that really good living legend journey is no interference from the developers. So no bans, no artificial changes, right? It's the perfect living legend for me. Follows that, growing momentum, but it doesn't meet it with, and the devs did X, and then this hero won. It's the devs kept designing the game the way they wanted to, and then because of the way a new hero came out, the way a new hero was designed, the old hero naturally slots in as a counter, and then beats the new hero up a bit, goes to living legend, retires, and then it's the new hero's turn to shine because its counter is just retired. And then, we go in this kind of really cyclical feeling, right? Also worth noting, there's only one hero from Arcane Rising left, and he could not go soon enough. When I play against a Kano on Talishar, I put on auto pass and I go and make tea, or I just kind of concede, depending on the deck I'm playing. I just kind of say I'm not going to play Kano, because if I feel like I'm on a deck where I can race Kano, then I will genuinely try. And then if I can't kill them before they combo me, I will just be like, okay, cool, I concede now. If I'm on a slower deck, then I don't really see the benefit to me playing Kano in a queue. Like, if I'm playing Victor, the Kano was probably going to win. And, I'll play a few rounds. I'll wait until I feel like he's going to kill me. But ultimately, once he starts going off, I'm not going to sit there and wait for them. Do it. Like, you can goldfish killing people on Kano if you want to, right? You don't have to do it on Talishar. So, if I was a Kano player practicing on Talishar, I'd be picking my matches pretty carefully. Just doing something. To wrap up this episode, because I know we've been talking for a while, and part of that was my holiday photos, but let's just finish talking for a moment. Let's just talk about SuperSlam. So, personally, not a big wrestling fan, right? I'd like to believe that, I'd like to say I'm a fan of fun, and some of this art is great. But I'm not a real big wrestling fan, so the whole revered versus reviled, heel versus face thing doesn't really appeal to me. But I do like the fact that we've got another new talent that kind of indicates that there's going to be some power in these sets, which is going to, need to be segregated away from the broader class cards, right? That's what talents really do in practice. They segregate the cards within them away from the broader class card availability. So it does indicate there will be some powerful cards in there. And then also, I just feel like we have some, and we've kind of said this the last few times, LSS has kind of hit its stride in terms of interesting mechanical design of new heroes. And I feel like we've found that again in this set. So you consider like Olympia. Now we have had it confirmed that Olympia and Betsy were supposed to be draft only. But if you consider something like KO, right? Interesting ability, not, but like fairly easy. And then we get into stuff like Pleiades and stuff like Tough Nut and Lyath and all these things. Personally, I firmly believe the retcon. So the current thinking is that so the meme that's been going around about Victor is that he is the horse, right? Ever since we saw this fantastic art, the joke has always been Victor is the horse, and this is just like his assistant. And now that people have seen Lyath, everyone is still kind of joking that Victor was still the horse, because this is obviously his brother, right? Maybe his evil brother. The Victor is known to be reasonably evil. But people have been just joking, like, what if this is just like the same hero as we see on this card, and Victor is the horse, and then we have kind of like a Lord Farquaad situation going on, where like Victor is riding on the horse, but these aren't his real legs. These are just like fake legs. And then when he takes these off and gets down off the horse, he's actually a dwarf, because we've seen that Lyath is actually a dwarf. So people are kind of speculating, like, what if Lyath is actually the guy on the horse the entire time, and he's just wearing fake legs? I think it's hilarious. I don't think it's true. I think it's probably just his brother. We've seen that Victor's a bit of an evil kind of cheat, willing to buy his way to victory, but clearly his brother goes a bit further in terms of playing the villain. Pleiades looks really fun. I mean, suspense counters seem like they're going to be something that stops your aura from triggering, right? So, I mean, currently Guardian auras trigger the next turn after you're played. After they're played, you could see this ability using suspense counters to play them later, right? I mean, that's how the effect works in Magic with Suspend. You put a card off to the side, you take suspense counters off it, and when it's got 0, you play the spell. I could easily see that working in Fab, where you put an aura out with suspense counters on, and then the turn that it uses its ability is when the suspense counters work. And so we could see a lot of those, this at the start of your turn, destroy this, gets +3, but actually now with an added suspense mechanic that lets you control exactly when those cards are going to go away, right? And you can use it to just add a suspense counter to the same, so you can use it to to just do nothing if you want to, but you can use it to move them around a bit, which could be good. Trigger certain effects earlier. I think that's going to be really fun. Tough Nut literally made to play rock. First 3 intellect hero that is in CC. I think that's really interesting. I'm really keen to see how this works, because I think playing with intellect is one of the biggest risks the Fab designers could make. Right, 3 intellect is a huge penalty in terms of how much you can block on a turn, and I think giving him a free resource generation ability reflects how powerful, so how crippling they know 3 intellect is for the game. And similarly, like Lyath has 5 intellect, the first hero with that ability, a little Tyrion Lannister character here. But to pay that penalty, the base attack and block of all the cards he has is halved, rounded up. So while the average Guardian hand with 3 blocks will block 12, the average Lyath hand with 5 3 blocks will only block 10. So automatically he's already worse at blocking than any Guardian we've ever seen. And obviously, of course, he's technically worse than attacking than any other Guardian we've ever seen. And we've really got to say, how is this going to play out? But I think this is quite interesting. His ability clearly meant to be used on his opponent's turn. It gives defending cards +1. So that means that his average hand now blocks the same as other Guardians, right? Because you're going to pitch 1 card, and then the rest of your cards are going to block for 3. So now you're blocking 12 just like every other Guardian. and you get a might token, which starts to play against the base halving of the power of all of your cards. So I think he's going to be really interesting. I'm definitely going to give him a try. I do play Guardians, so I'll have to give Pleiades and Lyath a try. I don't play Brute, so I'm not going to be trying KO or Tough Nut, except on Talishar a bit, right? It's an interesting ability. I'm not sure what we're going to do with this. Like, there's very few cards at the moment that don't have decent base power that you're going to want to play. The only real example that comes to mind is Vipox, which Vipox all right. This is the one that makes your opponent lose life equal to the number of cards in their hand if it hits. It has 1 power and it's a blue. Is it better with 6 power? Absolutely it is. Your opponent probably just going to block it. But, that's a forced block, so it's not too bad. Super Rares coming back is interesting. We've kind of said for a while that Majestic prices were getting a bit weird. Some were worth just too little, and some were worth way too much. And I think this is kind of an acknowledgement of this. Like, having Super Rares come back into the game does a few things. These cards are a lot more common in draft, which is obviously useful to build your draft strategies around them. And I feel like, well, they do say it's one night only, so it'll be interesting to see, like, is this only coming back for this set? If so, it's a bit of a weird choice, but maybe they're just experimenting with it. And again, I've said in the past, I don't really mind any experiment that LSS decide to do, because they're all fun, right? They're all fun. Any of them could be the success that revolutionizes how Fab works. A lot of the draft stuff that we've had has all been experiments. Giving multiple weapons in high seas was a huge payout. Dual cards, huge payout. Bringing out sets that have all of one class, like everyone's a pirate, huge payout, huge experiment. So Super Rares coming back, probably a bit of an experiment. Probably a bit of a not crack shuffle play. Probably a bit of a sealed experiment as well. We'll see how it plays out. I am reasonably excited for it, though, because I do think that Super Rares feel that very good niche of this. This isn't a Majestic. It's not that good, but it is a staple card that you don't want showing up in draft that much. I think Super Rares fill a very important niche in the Fab environment, so I am actually quite glad to see them back. Yeah, that's it. World premiere is in Montreal. This is why they've announced it when they have, because they want people to start buying tickets already. I'm probably not going to be going to this one. The set looks fun mechanically to me. Thematically, it's not enough to get me to fly to Canada. As I've already said, if it was the second there's a druid in the set, expect me to fly to wherever it is, even if it's in America or New Zealand or anywhere. Yeah, that's really excited. The new Plurals kits are pretty good too. Just makes it nice and easy to get a bit of extra spice at the pre-release. There'll be maybe a dice or something in there. These have always been quite popular in Magic, as well as, of course, just giving them a product that they can ship out without having to ship out tons of boxes, which stores might take advantage of or sell. They can ship out pre-release kits and have a very definite, like, this is how many. And then the other big announcement, which I think was, huge, and I really am keen to see, is that they have announced there's going to be 31 cards in the expansion slot, which is huge compared to previously. And also they have announced there are going to be several key reprints. I've said before, we need reprints. We just do. Even the price of a regular deck is too expensive. The price of a Living Legend deck is ludicrous. Someone was saying, there's Living Legend skirmishes, but the cost to buy a good Living Legend deck is £1,000. I can't do that. So that's just a reality. More reprints are fantastic, and I will say, in terms of keeping myself honest, which I think is very important. And I don't think we could talk about cost without talking, of course, about reprints. The CNC reprint at this stage, I think we've kind of all established that it hasn't really worked as well as we would have liked. CNC has come down a bit. But the cheapest version is still £45, which is just way too much for an individual Majestic, especially a generic powerhouse that own. However, the strategy of reprinting something at Legendary has kind of worked for Codex of Frailty. The price has now dropped to £26. It does still need to go a bit further, but if there is a second wave of high seas, as has been predicted, this could drop further. And if it gets down to the price of the other high seas legendary, so we're talking about the other high seas legendaries, which are down around 15, 14, 17 mark. If it gets down that far, I think the reprint will have succeeded, right? No one's saying Codex of Frailty should be worth nothing. It's one of the most powerful Majestics in the game. It's a 2-class Majestic, so it's instantly double in appeal beyond what is desired for a single class, right? So, to say it should be worth less is kind of a bit silly, but if it is worth around £14, £15, that is actually a win. So maybe it will always be worth a slight bit more than the other legendaries just because it does come out, you do need 3 of them instead of 1. But it does look like the reprint has worked. So I'll put up my hand and say, that I was wrong about that one. It does seem like the main difference between a class card, even a dual class card, and the difference between a generic Majestic is the thing that is pushing the difference in price between these two and why the reprint policy did not work for Command & Conquer, but did work for Codex of Frailty. And of course, then it will be really interesting to see what happens with SuperSlam and how that affects the other reprints come out in that set. Anyway, as always, I've been Steelfur of Steelfur Speaks. If you liked this episode, do like and subscribe. These episodes come out once, usually every 1 or 2 weeks, talking about the latest updates of the game, but they are usually when I have things to say, not just when things are happening. Important difference. I do have a weekly news show that I will be more consistent with when I'm a bit more stable and not spending weekends on deserted islands. But this one is more just about talking about the things that are going on and what they mean for the game and for players of Flesh and Blood, rather than just talking about things for the sake of talking. If that sounds like something you would like and subscribe. I have been doing this channel for over 5 years, so I will be around for as long as you are Flesh and Blood, giving you the takes you need to be an informed player of the game. Speak to you all very, very soon.